Hello guys, in this video I'm going to share everything you need to know about colored pencils to start drawing in this medium. First we need to talk about the colored pencils themselves. There are numerous varieties of colored pencils available on the market today. Many of them sell as open stock, but most of them sell in boxes and packages ranging from 24 to 150 colors. I usually buy my colored pencils as open stock based on their Lightfastness ratings, and I'm gonna talk about this a little bit later. There is a very big difference in quality of colored pencils between the generic brands and artist quality professional colored pencils. I don't like using generics. I don't even recommend them for my students because you won't be able to achieve the same beautiful results because generic colored pencils don't have enough pigment. They're very hard and it's impossible to create the same shading, as with professional colored pencils. You'd be surprised, but in essence, all professional colored pencils are wax based, but some brands have a lot more wax in them and they're categorized as wax based. Very soft wax based colored pencils adhere to the paper's tooth, and paper's tooth is the surface feel or the texture of the paper. They adhere more than the oil based colored pencils, which leads to different blending techniques. Oil based pencils like polychromas behave more like soft pastels, and depending on the paper that you use with them, they're going to produce different results. Besides having wax in every colored pencil, they also consist of binders, hardeners, fillers, and colorants, which all contribute to color intensity. My favorite brands of wax-based colored pencils are Carandash Luminance. It's the Cadillac of colored pencils. Super expensive, but they are light, fast, durable, and have rich pigmentation. I also like Prismacolor Premier colored pencils because I think they work well for the beginners, for students, and some of the colors are light fast and I use them together with my other colored pencils. You can also look into Derwent Colorsoft. Wax-based colored pencils offer superior coverage and a very easy application and blending because of their softness, but they also don't last as long because of the same softness, so you have to sharpen them often and you go through them a lot faster than working with oil-based colored pencils. Also, another disadvantage of wax-based colored pencils is wax bloom or a fairly easy breakdown of a pencil. Be careful with Prismacolor Black because it gives you a lot of wax bloom. It's a white glaze over your drawing. When you use a lot of black, you're going to have this wax bloom. In terms of oil-based colored pencils, I love working with Faber-Castell Polychromas and Carandash Pablos. Pablos are softer than polychromas. They're very close to Prismacolors in essence. But again, not of them are light fast. Not every artist likes polychromas because they're a lot harder, but none of the colored pencils broke. You have to learn how to use polychromas. They're excellent for the detail work, layering them on top of, initial application of colored pencils. Oil-based colored pencils, they're a lot more durable. They also don't bloom and last a lot longer. Water-soluble colored pencils are different from wax-based colored pencils, so don't mix the two, but you can consider working with them in the future to create underpaintings for your colored pencil work. So they are not required to start a drawing, but they can be useful when you want to cover large areas in colored pencil, and it's just a lot easier to use water-soluble colored pencils first. For that reason, you need to plan accordingly and use a different kind of paper that can withstand a water application. Let's talk about the light fastness of colored pencils. On my website, I keep a blog post with several charts showing the light fastness of major professional colored pencil brands. What can be confusing about reading the light fastness charts of colored pencils is the star rating itself. There is no unity in light fastness presentation. Some brands use a 1-star rating to show that their colored pencils have excellent light fastness, which is 100 plus years, while other brands use the same 1-star rating to rate their worst or fugitive colors. So you must pay attention to the light fastness rating of each brand to get correct reading of their light fastness charts. What is light fastness? Light fastness is the ability of colors to withstand strong UV light over a very prolonged time frame. Usually colors that have excellent rating are not supposed to fade for over 100 years. And fugitive colors can fade within very few years that I saw myself happening when I began drawing with Prismacolor Premier colored pencils. I didn't care about the light fastness back then, as I was a beginner. It matters a lot to me now because I sell my art. Of course, this decision comes at a considerable cost, upgrading my art supplies to the best performing colored pencils. I buy them as open stock, paying attention to the rating itself. That's why I use very few colored pencils to create my drawings. And generic colored pencils don't even offer the light fastness ratings. My guess is that none of them are light fast. And as an example, when we look at polychromous colored pencils, they have a 3-star light fastness rating. 3 stars mean maximum light fastness. And if we look at Prismacolor colored pencils, they use a different rating. They give 1 to colored pencils that have excellent light fastness. And also when you use markers, you also can see if they are light fast or not. If we look at Pitt Artist pens, they have 1 to 3-star light fastness rating. The 3 stars have maximum light fastness. The right choice of paper is critical to your success, and you have to match your paper to a specific brand of colored pencils. And you can watch a lot of videos and take recommendations, but at the end of the day, it's you who decides what best for you. So I'm going to list very popular papers that work well, but you always have to try it with your supplies, with your colored pencils to figure out what you like the best. Okay, and also just like with colored pencils, you don't want to work on poor quality sketch paper or generic drawing paper because it's too thin. It doesn't hold, the layers of shading. It also becomes unusable quite quickly, becoming too muddy. You just need to stay away from such papers. Cheap drawing paper wears out quickly. Erasing makes permanent change to the surface, and they're not able to hold extensive layering, solvent blending, and burnishing. With practice, you will learn to match specific colored pencils with specific papers that the pencils work best on. For instance, I love polychromos pencils, and they perform really well on pastel paper, such as pastel mats and boards. They also work well with UART paper 800 grit. Wax-based colored pencils like Prismacolor Premier work wonderful on Bristol vellum surfaces, and Kohinoor Bristol vellum or Stonehenge paper pads work beautifully. If you decide to underpaint with water-soluble pencils, use professional hot-pressed watercolor paper such as Arches. The ideal colored paper for colored pencil drawing should be thick, smooth, and come in a variety of colors. Paper's weight or thickness is very important because it stays flat when you lay a color. Also, when you fix it, it stays flat. It also has a much better professional look. If you decide to sell your work, it doesn't look flimsy. Examples of such paper are Legion Stonehenge paper pads, Strathmore drawing paper, Strathmore Bristol vellum. I also love Kohinoor Bristol vellum paper or Kohinoor colored pencil paper. Another thing that's super important about choosing the right paper for your drawings is the texture of the paper or its tooth. Paper tooth lets your colored pencil adhere to a surface. Think of it as a wave. The higher the wave is, the more texture it has and the more layering your paper accepts. While textured papers are great for work in pastel or charcoal, texture is the most serious impediment to a smooth colored pencil layering and blending. It also eats up soft colored pencils, so stay away from textured surfaces at all costs because it's very frustrating to fill in the gaps in textured paper. And you also you have to use solvents to make your drawing a lot smoother, so it's not worth it. That's why a lot of artists draw on Bristol smooth paper and Bristol vellum paper that has a little bit of texture in comparison to Bristol smooth. And for that reason, look at Legion Stonehenge paper vellum, Kohinoor Bristol smooth and Bristol vellum, Kohinoor colored pencil. Also, some printmaking papers could work really well, like BFK Reeves. Colored paper or toned paper is my absolute favorite to work in colored pencil. It's a second step. First, you need to learn how to use working on white paper, and then at some point switch to working on colored paper. What's fun about colored paper is that the same colors react differently to colored surfaces, giving very bright, unusual color combinations and vividness that's often impossible to achieve on a white drawing paper. It's also super fun to create highlights using white colored pencil on toned paper. And just know that color construction paper is not suitable for professional drawing. A lot of artists work on Strathmore's tone gray sketch paper, and it's good for sketching and studies, but this paper is very thin for professional drawing. It's okay for sketching only. To try toned paper, you can look at Stonehenge paper in light shades. You can look at colored mat boards. I also love drawing on Canson color line papers and Kohinoor black drawing pads. Other supplies that you need. You need to pick your pencil sharpener, and I use a manual pencil sharpener, believe it or not, because it doesn't eat my pencils and I control the sharp. But you can look at the General's All Art Pencil Sharpener. This is the electric one. The electric pencil sharpener by Panasonic is also good. I also use two types of erasers. One is the kneaded eraser, and the second one is Tombow Mono Zero eraser. The kneaded eraser lifts out pigment and pencil residue softly, leaving no grease or residue on the paper. It is vital to the clean appearance of your artwork. And I use the Tombow eraser to erase my mistakes in tiny places. And I also use it to create texture when I need to create texture, like pulling out soft hair. You also must have two or three pencil extenders, because when your expensive colored pencils become short, you don't want to throw them out. You can use most of them by using the pencil extender. A clean drafting brush is helpful to get rid of all the dirt or pencil fleck that can accumulate on your drawing. Also, some artists use a light box to transfer the images, or you can try working with graphite transfer paper to transfer the outlines. It comes in different colors. It's not going to work on white paper. If you use black graphite transfer paper, you're going to use your drawing because the lines are going to be very dark. But you can use this graphite transfer paper to transfer the outlines onto your toned or colored paper. And also don't forget about the fixatives. They are important. They create a barrier between your drawing and the environment. They protect your drawing from harmful UV rays and moisture. I don't use workable fixatives. I use a final fixative to fix my drawings. Good brand is Grumbacher. It gives me a very nice coverage spray, and the drawings look very beautiful. You also need to look at blending supplies. Most colored pencil art requires some kind of blending to achieve a smooth glass-like appearance of the surface. And there are two types of blending techniques you can use. You can use solvents and pencils. Solvents melt the binder in the wax pencil, producing a rich, uniform surface, which eliminates pencil strokes. Solvents include paint thinners, rubbing alcohol, mineral oil, and there are non-toxic solvents available. I usually use Gamsol. I used to use solvents a lot, but now I mainly use a pencil blender, or I shade my drawing in such a way that I don't need to use a blender at all. A good alternative to Gamsol is Zested. To blend drawings with pencils, you may use colorless blenders. They are not messy, but it could be super time consuming to work with them if you work large. I love Carandash Full Blender Bright. Prismacolor colorless blender is okay, but it's not great because it leaves a grayish tint on the surface of my drawing. And you can also look at Lyra Rembrandt Splendor Colorless Blender. You can also use Copic markers to create underpaintings for your drawings, but it's a more advanced technique, and you need to get used to drawing in colored pencil only first. I also use acrylic pens to create highlights. All of them are light fast. So if my highlights got lost or I want to add an extra punch, I use light fast markers. Here I'd like to mention the importance of light and your setup to take pictures as a reference for your drawings. Practice your photography skills. Try taking close-up pictures of your subjects. Look at the shadows, because when you recreate those shadows in your drawings, they create a physical presence of your subject. So pay attention to the light and the shadows. Place your object next to a window to create beautiful lighting conditions. What makes a great picture is often taking a common subject and placing it in an unusual situation or environment, or finding a totally unexpected angle or point of view. You can browse for ideas and inspiration online. I often use Pixabay to do just that. So to begin taking pictures, focus on close-ups and place your subject in next to a window where you can see a clear difference between the light and the shade. I made a separate video talking about photography and how you can set up your subjects. Check it out. Next, we need to talk about how to pick your colors for your project. It's going to depend on your reference, of course. A lot of artists would recommend creating endless charts and matching those chart colors with your color choices. I think it's too complicated, and I think it's not very useful, to be honest. One of the reasons why it doesn't quite work is the fact that when you place one color next to another, it looks one way, but if you place the same color next to a different one, it looks in a different way. And if you place the same color over another color, it looks different again. That's why color swatches are good, just to get to know your colors, but they're not going to help you much in color mixing, because you learn this with experience. You do need to test your colors to see how light or dark they are, but you also need to think of values or tones of your colors as opposed to the color itself. Because when we draw, we use different pencil pressure, and the same colored pencil is going to perform differently depending on your pencil pressure or the amount of layers that you use to shade a specific area. So when you open your colored pencil box, trying to figure out what colors to use, it's not colors by numbers, but you need to look at the basic color that you see. For instance, if the object has a lot of red, you pick your reds, but at the same time, your color choice is going to depend on the pencil pressure and the value or lightness or darkness of your object. Begin training yourself to see color temperature and value in every hue, because red consists of both warm and cool colors, and it also has a range of values going from very dark one to a very light one. You also want to see other colors that contribute to the overall color that you see, because every area has variations of that color because of the reflections, temperature of the light. Now let's talk about basic techniques in colored pencil drawing. First of all, when you look at your reference, it's best to have a second reference, which is a black and white image of your original reference. So why do you need to do so? It helps you to see values as opposed to color. And value means lightness or darkness of an object or an area that you draw. When you start shading a range of values, and students have a hard time controlling the values, so your black and white image helps you see the original value or how light or dark a specific area should be. So when you start shading, you know how much darker you need to shade to create enough contrast between the light points and the dark points. So this black and white image allows you to create enough contrast in your drawings. So when you look at your image, ask yourself how light or dark you should shade your object in comparison to your background or the shadow or the second object that you have. Find your highlights and don't shade your highlights with any pencil if you work on white paper. Also mark your shadows and use your HB graphite pencil to make very light outlines. You don't want to create hard outlines because they're going to be very dark when you shade with colored pencils over them. So you have to use kneaded eraser to lighten up your outlines before you start shading. So the first step is to sketch your outlines, then transfer those outlines onto your good drawing paper. Use the kneaded eraser to lighten up those outlines. Then figure out where you have your highlights and use a very light pencil, like off-white pencil, to mark those highlights, not to color them. Then you need to use your darker pencil to determine where you have your shadows, and only after that you are ready to start shading from dark to light. And colored pencil doesn't like graphite lines. You don't want to smudge your paper. I often put, simple white paper underneath my hand to prevent smudging. Pencil layering is a skill, and you need to hold your pencil properly to do so. When you shade, you need to have a range of motion. That's why don't hold your pencil too close to the point. When you begin shading, try layering to control your pencil pressure, because the same colored pencil could be pushed to the extremes to create a wide range of values. And you learn to control your pencil pressure to transition your shading from one color to the next. I think what's important to practice is your layering and then overlapping the colors. One of the most common mistakes students make, they use one colored pencil on an area, then they stop and use the second one right next to it, as opposed to overlapping the colors and shading over the previous color to create a nice and soft transition between the two colors. Another very common mistake is to shade around the edge instead of overlapping and shading over the edge just a little bit. The result of this kind of shading creates confusion. We don't understand where the background begins or where the edge ends. So to prevent this, you have to shade over the edge slightly to fill in the space. If you decide to use solvent to blend your colored pencil work, make sure that you use a soft and clean brush. Always clean it first using the solvent and using the paper towel. And you want to take excess of the solvent off your brush and then use it carefully over your drawing. Then you let it dry, and you can shade with colored pencil over the blended area again, and you can even use the solvent over it once more, although usually it's not necessary. You will notice that colored pencil layers differently once you use the solvent to blend the first layer. And the common mistake here is that students don't put enough pigment onto the paper to blend it properly. Have enough shading done before you start blending the area. Almost always you have to blend the entire drawing if you start blending it in one specific area. It happens because the blended area looks so very different from the rest of the drawing, so you kind of have to unify the entire drawing, the entire appearance, and that's why you have to use this technique all over your drawing. I used to use solvent a lot, but now I don't use it. So another way of blending is to use colorless pencils. It works, but it's super time consuming. But you don't use the solvent, so the surface doesn't really change in that regard, because I feel like over time some colored pencils may disappear off the surface because of the solvent use. I really like using Carandash full blender to blend the areas when I need to blend them. You can use, solvents or blenders to create a glass-like appearance, but if you want to create a texture, you can use a different technique. It's called rubbing or color gradation. You can place an object underneath your paper, and your paper shouldn't be very thick for it to work, and then you basically rub your colored pencil over that area to create the texture. When you work on your drawings, when you shade any given area, your pencil direction is super important. No one talks about it, but you create volume by shading your object in a specific direction. If you create thoughtless long lines, your object is going to appear very flat. You always need to think of the curvature and create unique directional lines and shading that helps you with the rotation of the object. Let's talk about the highlights, how to create them. First thing is not to color your highlight. The whiteness of your paper is your purest highlight. So it must remain white, and when you shade around those highlights, you need to create very nice and soft transitions to make it look natural. However, if you colored your highlight for any reason, you can restore it by using markers. There are different types of markers. Some of them are very strong and others are soft, but you can place tiny highlights using the markers. You can also indent your paper to create very thin, tiny highlights, and you can do so using the tracing paper. Place it over your drawing, and then use a ballpoint pen to create the veins or tiny highlights. And so when you start coloring, those highlights are going to remain white. To create highlights on colored paper, you simply use white and off-white colors to shade the highlights with them. I usually use a combination of two light colors to create the highlight, because most of the time the highlight is warm, not cool, and white colored pencil is a cool pencil, cool color on its own. I also love to use gray colored pencils for two purposes. First of all, it's a fantastic blender if you have the area that is too dark, or you want to create a nice transition, you can use the gray colored pencil to create a soft transition. Grays blend the colored pencils really well. You can use white or light gray to blend the edges, for instance, to blend the edge around the highlight. Also, grays are wonderful because they create this beautiful color harmony. When everything is so bright, you don't know where to look. But if you have a strong color, just a single color, and everything else is grayed down, you create a very beautiful color harmony using the grays. Finally, I'd like to mention how to approach drawing reflective objects or glass. When we look at glass, to understand what's behind it, the areas must be blended and the color of the glass should be very similar to the color of the background. When we look at silver or gold objects, it's not about using silver or gold colored pencils. They don't work on white paper. They do work on colored paper, but not on white. And so to create the illusion of the reflective object is to look at the actual shape of the reflection and the color of it. For instance, if we look at the silver object, it reflects a lot of grays and blues and even some brownish yellow. When we look at the color of gold, it usually reflects warm brown colors and even some blue. You have to zoom in and look at the color that you see inside of that gold object. I also want to show you how to look at the eyes and how to draw them realistically. Formula is super simple. You want to capture the highlight or the reflection seen in the eye. You also want to capture the reflected light on the opposite side of the highlight. You also want to put the shadow right under the eyelid to create a volume. These are very basic techniques that I use in colored pencil every day, but there is a lot more to learning and discovering how to use colored pencil and what surfaces to work on. You can check out my book, The Colored Pencil Manual, or you can visit my website, veronicasart.com, to see all the video classes that are available for you today to take your art to the next level. My comprehensive colored pencil techniques video course is built in progression to show you how to create volume, textures, how to draw glass and reflective surfaces. My portrait drawing course focuses on drawing people in colored pencil, and I also have keep a course that consists of downloadable files if you want to work on specific projects step by step. You don't want to watch the videos. Thanks so much for watching. If you have any questions, you can leave a comment below. I check the comments. If you want to contact me, you can find me on social media, Facebook and Instagram, and message me there. I wish you lots of luck and success in your creative endeavors. Thanks so much for watching. Take care. Bye bye.